Alright, welcome back. Let's learn how to read and write files. So the first thing we want to do is create a new project or new package. Inside a project, we're going to call this files. And inside this package, let's create a class called read. So we're going to have a read class, and we'll give it a main. Hit finish. There we go. Okay, so reading data from a file is pretty simple, and just a few steps here. The first thing is we need to define the file or the path that we want to read. Okay, so for example, this is going to be let's create a file in Notepad. Something like this is data in a file for SDET University. Okay, now we'll save this. Let's put this inside our SDET University folder, and I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call this folder files. We'll have a couple things we want to do in here. Okay, inside here, let's call this file to read. Okay, there we go, in this directory, and there we go, close down our new file. Okay, so in Java, what we want to do then is define that. So we want to say string file name equals, and then the path of where that file is sitting. So let me open up Windows Explorer, and I'm going to go to SDET University, files, and here's the file that we just created. Okay, so I'm going to copy this directory and then include the files to, or file to read.txt. Okay, real quick about how this is worded. So in Java, when we give a directory, we need to have 2 slashes or a /. So this would work, right? This would work. This would work. What will not work is this, right? This is actually how it looks in your Windows Explorer, right? With a single /. But Java doesn't like reading that because it's going to read that as a character. So make sure you have 2 /. Okay, so we have our file that we're going to bring in. Now we need to create the file in Java. Okay, so what is that? That's going to be a file equals new file from the file name. Okay, so this is creating the file within Java, and I'm going to bring in that library. And now this file is going to have some methods that we're going to be able to use. So we have the file in Java. Next thing we need to do is then open the file. So to open the file and then to read it, what we want to do is say we want to create now a buffered reader. We'll call it br equals new buffered reader. And inside that buffered reader, in this new object we're creating, we're going to pass to the constructor actually a file reader object that's going to be coming from the file. Okay, so this might be a little bit confusing. This is just a nested statement here. So instead of creating a new file reader and then creating a new buffer reader, I'm just going to create a new buffered reader, and then in that argument going to pass a new file reader which is coming from the file. Okay, I'm going to import these libraries, file reader and the buffer reader. There we go. Okay, now there's going to be some exception handling, and we'll handle this in just a moment. Because what we want to do once we open the file is then read the file. How do we read the file? Well, we have our buffer object br, so we want to type br dot. Once again, here are all the methods that are available to us, and for what we're doing right now, we just want to do the read line method. Then we want to put that into a variable like string text equals br.readline. There we go. Okay, so let's stop and then handle our exceptions, and let's talk about different exceptions that might occur. So the first thing that we want to think about, again, first of all with exceptions, number one, you may or may not remember these off the top of your head. So Eclipse will clue you into what exceptions you might need to use, and then you'll just encounter more and more as you get more into programming, but it's not like you are aware of all the exceptions out there. But if you do hover, actually before we hover, let's think through this analytically, right? So what's one possible error that would occur in this program? If we're trying to open a file, what's one possible error? Well, one is, what if the file doesn't exist? What if, for example, we are looking in this folder for a file called files to read, right? Well, that file doesn't exist. Or what if it's file to read and we forget the suffix, the extension? Well, that's going to cause an error. Java won't know how to handle that. So we need a way to handle the possibility that Java can't find this file. And so what is that? If we hover over, well, that's exactly an exception that Eclipse is suggesting us to handle, which is a file not found exception. So let's put this inside a try catch. Okay, now automatically Eclipse generates for us this try catch block. It surrounds this problem statement inside the try. And actually what I want to do is say if it's looking for a file not found exception and it does find it, then we want to say error file not found, and then let's concatenate the file name. Okay, alright, very good. And let's see here, once we open the file, so now we're all good, right? Then we want to read the file. Now this also has its own exception. It has an input-output exception. So for example, what if it's trying to read like a PowerPoint file, right? What's the reading a line from the PowerPoint file? Or what if it's trying to, what if it encounters a picture? There's an input-output exception. So we can add another try-catch block here, or what I would say is let's put that inside this try-catch, and then when we hover over, it says let's handle this exception type. Now you can select the suggested ones. Don't do it blindly. I would not recommend surrounding with a try-catch block, because now you have a nested try, and that can be kind of a mess. And what you also don't want to do, what you couldn't do, is then have a combination. You can do it generally, but in this case you can't because they kind of compete with one another. What we can do then is add a catch to the surrounding try. So we have a second catch, and that's an input-output exception. And then I'm going to say here, sysout error could not read the data, and then we'll say file name. Okay, so this is looking good. We have opened the file, we have reading the file, and let's see here. What we want to do is, so after we have a catch, let's add finally. So once we're done with this try catch, let's just print out, say, finished reading the file. Okay, and then finally now let's say, let's print out what we got. So if we wanted to read text, let's print out text. Okay, but there's an error because we only defined text. Again, we declared it within this try catch block, so it's a local variable local to the try block. What we want to do is actually declare the variable outside the try block. We'll put it, say, up here, initialize it to null. That way when we come into the try, we can then set it equal to the line. Again, if we didn't do this, then for example, if the try threw an error, right? So if the try threw an error, then text would never be defined. So and again, text was what we want to define it within a block, but we need to declare it outside the block. Alright, so we have our setup here. Let's run this and see what happens. There we go. There's our output. This data is in a file for SDET University. Okay, so we have everything we wanted to do. The last thing actually, which I forgot to do, is step 5, is we want to close the resources. Okay, what does that mean? Well, we just want to do br.close. So after we read, then we want to close it. And again, we need to, this also, by the way, has an input-output exception, so we could put this like in the finally. But again, we'd have actually another try-catch within a finally, and that's just going to be kind of ugly, so we don't want to mess with that. We could put it outside, and again, we're also going to have the same input-output exception error. So why not just tuck it inside our current try block, and then we'll handle it with with the input-output exception. Okay, so we defined the file, we created the file in Java. We're going to open the file, and in fact we could also, if we wanted to, put that statement right here. Sometimes it's best to have things as local as possible if you don't need them to be global. So steps 3, 4, and 5 all happen within this one try block. So we definitely need to handle those exceptions. Okay, so that is, there you go, still working. Okay, very good. So there's lots of other ways we can enhance this, and we'll get to this later as far as like what if we want to read a CSV file, how do we handle that? And there's lots of other things. But this is the basics of how to read data from a file.